What's good, Cubers? We're back with another card of the week, and this week we're going to take a look at Hydriod Krasis. Now, if you want to suggest your own card for card of the week, be sure to list it in the comments below, and we will put you next in the list. But let's get started. Hydriod Krasis has been straight up murdering people in Sultai and Standard. But the question we want to talk about today is Hydriod Krasis cubable? So, let's look at its face value. For X and Simic, you get a Jellyfish Hydra Beast. Simic just gets the best creature types. Whenever you cast this spell, you gain half X life and draw half X cards round down each time. Flying, trample, flample, and if all that wasn't enough, Krasis enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. What this means in layman's terms is if you pay 4 for X, you get a 4/4 Flying Trampler that on cast lets you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. So, first of all, Krasis crushes the Vindicate test because when you cast him, you will gain life and draw cards guaranteed, and it's on cast, which means that part of Krasis is counterspell proof. Now, detractors will tell you, and rightly so, that Krasis is bad early, so when you're putting Krasis in your cube, you need to think in your mind that Krasis is going to be a 6-drop. Casting this guy for anything less than 4 means you're only drawing 1 card and gaining 1 life, and it probably means you're in desperation mode. So, remember, in our minds, Krasis is at least a 6-drop. Now these are what I would classify as the Simic staples. Edric Spymaster of Trest is really strong. Whenever a creature deals damage to an opponent, its controller draws a card. So he's really good in green-blue token strategies or green-blue go-wide strategies or even green tramplers when he's on the field because they'll let you hit your opponent and draw cards. Now Nissa has a very similar casting cost to Krasis, but I would argue that she's actually a 3-drop. If you cast Nissa for X = 1 and then scry 2 immediately, she'll have 3 loyalty. So you can actually play Nissa as a 3-drop. You can't do that with Krasis. If you play Krasis for 1, you gain no life and draw no cards. So that's horrible. So Nissa could be a 3-drop with the upside of being cast for something much larger and getting to ultimate her immediately, whereas Krasis is a higher drop. And Nissa is without a doubt the best Simic Walker at the moment. So these are the staples. How does Krasis stack up against the other tier 2 staples in Simic? So these guys are the other most commonly run cards in Simic. Coiling Oracle is like this weird ramp spell with a body. Trigon Predator is really good, but also really boring. Whenever it hits your opponent, you get to blow up artifacts and enchantments, so that's nice. You got some removal. It's a 2/3 flyer, so it's not costed correctly. It feels like it ought to be a 3/3 flyer, but still, it's okay. And then Mystic Snake, who I know a lot of people love from way back, but in reality, he's a 4-mana counterspell with a 2/2 body. Now, Ravnica Allegiance just printed the Frilled Mystic, who's double green and double blue for basically the same ability, and Frilled Mystic isn't good enough to make it in cube. So why are we still playing Mystic Snake? Why are we still playing Coiling Oracle, who is not that great either? The answer is Simic doesn't have a lot of great choices. So as a result, maybe we can replace one of these guys with Hydriod Krasis. But there is one other card I want to compare Hydriod Krasis to, and that's the Simic Sky Swallower. He's our friendly neighborhood Simic Stompy card. Now he costs 7 for a Flying, Trample, and Shroud 6/6, and that feels pretty doggone beefy. Most of the time, if Simic Sky Swallower hits the field, your opponent is going to die because he's almost impossible to remove. I mean, you can't even target him with your stuff, for goodness sakes. How can your opponent? I actually think Krasis gives us more value on cast, and the benefit to be played for 6 is just night and day different from 7 in cube. You can hit that 6th land, but a lot of times it'll take you an extra turn or 2 to find that 7th. So that might make Krasis better, but there's something else I do want to point about Sky Swallower. He can be recurred. He can be sneak and showed. He can be sneak attacked. He can be cheated into play in a way that Krasis simply cannot. If you recur Krasis or cheat him into play, he's a 0/0 and he dies immediately. And that is a drawback as far as playing other colors or other archetypes with Krasis. But Sky Swallower seldom tempts drafters to splash him in their decks, whereas I feel like Krasis is worth running that 1 blue mana for, even if you're in Gruul Stompy, let's say, because Krasis gives you so much value when you cast him, whereas I don't think a Gruul deck would go Teamer just to pick up Sky Swallower. I think Krasis encourages players to splash him, where other Simic cards are not really splashed at all. Most of the time when you're in Simic, you're in Simic. So what kind of decks do we play Hydriod Krasis in? Well, if you run +1/+1 counter support in your cube, Hydriod Krasis is your boy. You're not going to have a better outlet for dropping gigantic +1/+1 counter creatures on the battlefield than Krasis. And Krasis is really good in some kind of ramp or super ramp deck where you play large fat creatures with lots of mana because he fits into your curve wherever you start to level out with your mana. You can cast him for 4, or you can cast him for 7 or 8. And the bigger he is, the more bonus, the more card draw you get off of him. And one of the problems with super ramp decks is they ramp into this giant threat and then their hand's empty. But if you ramp into Krasis, Krasis will refill your hand, so then you can just drop a second fatty on the field right behind him. So is Krasis cubable? I actually think yeah. He's splashable, he replaces himself, he is a game-ending threat, and he is a great new card for Simic players. Furthermore, aggro decks hate Krasis. If you cast Krasis for 4, he's a giant body that they can attack through, that gained you life and drew you cards, which is everything aggro decks don't want their opponents to do. So, he's also a great sideboard card or splash cards to help hose down aggro decks that may or may not be too strong in your queue. Now there are cons because he is in better late, but if we're thinking of him as a 6-drop, this isn't a big deal. Now, there's no cheat or recursion with Krasis, and that does feel problematic, and it isn't great when Krasis is splashed into a black deck because they don't have a way to get him out of their yard. I would say the other real drawback to Krasis is that he's really popular in Standard right now. As a matter of fact, at the recording of this video, non-foil copies of Krasis are around $25, which is a lot for a card just to try it out. So that's definitely a con. Still, Simic doesn't have a lot of great staples, and it doesn't have a lot of splashable or super interesting cards, and I think Krasis is definitely worth testing, definitely worth trying out in your home cube, just to see how it feels, to see how your drafters respond to it. I'm a big fan of it. Give Krasis a whirl. That's gonna do it for today, Cubers. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you can catch us next time. Don't miss any of our content. We're on the Twitter. You can tweet, snap, whatever the kids are calling it nowadays to catch us there. The important thing is we'll reply back. Take care, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.